Hi, I'm Peggy Simingson, and we're talking with Dr. Lee Hall. We're both literacy professors, and our topic today is about labels and students with reading difficulties. So, Lee, what do you think is important for teachers to know about adolescents who have academic reading difficulties and often acquire the struggling reader label?
All right, well, for teachers that work with adolescents, they're probably very familiar with kids that are labeled as struggling readers or kids that think they are not very good readers. I'm sure that it's a pretty common thing for teachers that work with adolescents. And so the first thing that I would say is, obviously be aware of their difficulties. So some of these difficulties are very real, and some of them are more that the students perceive they have difficulties that they may not actually have. Some kids are better readers than they realize. But get to know your students and be aware of the difficulties that they have. Also, I think it's important to know that, for them to be aware that students are limiting their abilities to learn content and improve as readers. And so what I mean by that is adolescents that are struggling readers, by the time they're 13, 14 years old or so, they know that reading is difficult for them in school. And so they've kind of shut down because they've had these repeated bad experiences. And so if you talk to them, they'll tell you kind of what's the point of continuing on when it never gets any easier for me, it never gets any better. So they will withdraw. But despite the fact that they're going to have difficulties, and despite the fact that they might withdraw from participating with texts in classrooms, it's also important to understand that these students actually want to get better at reading. They realize that they are doing things that don't allow them to get better at reading. They realize that the decisions that they make often result in them not learning content, but they don't like that. They would like for things to change, but they're not sure at this point in their lives how to go about making changes that are going to support them in positive ways.
Right, so the teacher needs to help them get from step one to step two.
Right. So realizing that these students do have aspirations and goals, and then helping them try to achieve them.
I like to just have conversations when I taught students who face challenges. I like to just talk to them and have conversations and get to know them.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's easy. Okay, good. I like what you said about awareness and knowing that, they do want to do better, but sometimes don't know how. What do you think limits or prevents adolescents from improving as readers?
Right. So one thing is something that I just said a second ago is that they've got like a long history of negative experiences with reading in school. And so when I talk with adolescents about their histories of reading in school, they'll trace it back to first grade, kindergarten, second grade. They talk about these very early negative experiences and how those continue to happen to them throughout the grades as they progress. And so from their perspective, these repeated negative experiences end up leaving them believing that they can't be any better, that being a poor reader is part of who they are, that they can't change it. So then what happens is, when they're sitting in, any classroom where there's reading that's expected to happen, and a teacher might ask them to read a chapter or a book or participate in a discussion about a piece of text, it's not that the students don't want to, because on some level they want to. They recognize that doing what their teachers ask will result in them learning content and improving as readers. But they also see a very real risk in doing those things, because when they do those things, they're going to have to put themselves out there and potentially expose their weaknesses, right? Potentially they're going to alert their peers, so that they're going to send messages to their peers that, hey, I'm not a good reader, and that's really embarrassing. Now, as a teacher, we might not think that that's a reality. We might think, oh, nobody's going to notice, or it's not going to be as bad as you think it is. But we have to set that aside and realize that from the student's perspective, this is a very real thing that they are really afraid of. They don't want to expose their weaknesses. They don't want to draw negative attention to themselves. So it doesn't matter as adults what we think in some regards. It matters that we understand their perspective. But I think it's also important to notice what I'm not saying here. So I'm not saying that students lack motivation to improve as readers, that students aren't interested in reading or improving as readers. Those are things that I think, assumptions that I think we often make about adolescents with reading difficulties. But actually, if you talk to them, right, like if you have a conversation, like you said earlier, you will find that most of these students are reading something right now. They can talk to you about things that they like to read, that they have a real interest and motivation to design, to improve as readers in school.
That's good. Yeah. So build on that and then helping them save face and not embarrass them. Yeah, that's totally true. I found that also. That's good. Awesome. I like all those things. And then the last question, how can teachers support students who have reading difficulties like day to day in the classroom?
Yeah, so I think there's some really simple things that teachers can do starting tomorrow. And these are not things that take any resources or really extra time, and it doesn't even really require teachers to do a whole lot different than what you're doing now. But in working with teachers, the things that I'm going to suggest here, I found have pretty big payoffs. So the first thing I'm going to suggest if you're doing it is to get rid of the terms good reader and bad reader. So, and this tends to happen more in elementary school, but it can happen in middle school. I've seen it where teachers will say, what do good readers do? What does it mean to be a good reader? And so even if you're not saying, what is a bad reader? If you're saying, what does a good reader do? What is a good reader? And you're making a list, adolescents are looking at that list. I've had them talk to me about this. They're looking at that list and they're saying, well, there's 5 things on the list of what it means to be a good reader, and I can only do one of them. So I'm a bad reader, right? Or I can do none of them, right? So they're going to automatically take that and flip it around to see how they do or do not fit on the good reader list and where they fall in terms of what it means to be a bad reader, even if you're not stressing that with them. What I would recommend, instead of talking about good readers and what good readers do, is to talk about reading in terms of what it means to read within your discipline. So if you're a history teacher, what does it mean to read like a historian? What kinds of skills do you need in order to read and understand history texts? Talk about the act of reading and what it means to read and what it looks like, not what it means to be good or bad. The second thing that I would recommend is to help students set goals for themselves as readers. And as teachers, you might not agree with the goals that the students set, but that doesn't matter. So asking students how they would like to improve as readers, asking them to identify 1, 2, up to 3 things. And students will say things, when they've done this, I've seen them say things like, I want to increase my vocabulary. I want to learn more difficult words. Sometimes they'll say things like, they'll talk about fluency. They'll say, I want to be able to read at a faster rate. So students have their own understandings for how they need to develop, and we need to respect that. And then as we're teaching them, we can make connections to how what we're asking them to do supports their goals. So if some students have said they want to improve their vocabulary, and you're doing a lesson where they're going to be exposed to some new difficult words, can make that connection for them. Don't assume that they'll make it themselves, but point out to them, hey, a number of you have said you really want to increase your vocabulary, you want to learn some new challenging words, and today you're going to get to do that, and here's how it's going to happen for you. And then the last thing that I would suggest is to make struggling normal, right? So kids that are labeled as struggling readers, that's seen as a negative thing, right? If you have difficulties understanding what we're reading, then somehow you're deficient, you're weak, you're bad. But in reality, we all struggle. And we all struggle in different contexts and in to varying degrees. So making that a normal, regular thing that we learn from and talking to students about, it's more of recognizing that we are having difficulties and then thinking about how we're going to engage with those difficulties and move past them, move through them, I think is important, rather than saying, well, if it's hard for you, there's something wrong with you.
Those are all great ideas. I think teachers could implement those over time. That's wonderful. Is there anything else you want to add?
I don't think so. I think I would stress what you said earlier, Peggy, about the importance of having conversations with your students, right? Just getting to know them, getting to know them as readers, like what they like to read, what they're reading for fun, for pleasure. Things like that I think are really important, and it'll help build the relationship with their students.
That's great. I love it. Easy to do also. Okay, great. Thank you.
All right. Thank you.